The ruthless Alpha King's son is a monster everyone fears, too dominant, too broken, and completely uncontrollable. But when a stubborn human waitress dares to challenge him, she does what warriors, elders, and even his father couldn't. She calms the beast inside. Now the most dangerous heir in the kingdom is obsessed with the only woman brave enough to defy him. Some stories begin with heroes. This one begins with a warning. In my kingdom, they told children never to look the Alpha King's son in the eyes, because monsters, they said, wake when you stare too long. By the time Kael turned 23, people spoke his name like it was a storm. He was the only heir of the Werewolf Alpha King, taller and broader than any warrior, with eyes that could glow like molten gold when his temper slipped. Court advisors said he was too wild to rule, too dangerous, too broken. Servants whispered that anyone who stayed too close to him for more than a minute left the room shaking, their own heartbeat racing like they had run for miles. No one ever said it to his face, but the whole palace had quietly agreed on one thing. No one could handle the Alpha King's son. No one, until the night he met the waitress. The evening began like a test he was doomed to fail. The Grand Sun Palace glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished gold railings, a place built to impress human ambassadors who did not believe in wolves until they signed treaties with them. Soft music floated through the ballroom, and the air smelled like roasted garlic, honeyed wine, and polished wood. Kael stood at the balcony for as long as he could, away from the crowd, hands gripping the cold stone rail, trying to breathe through the heavy thud of his own pulse. Below, the long banquet tables shone with white cloth and tall candles, and every chair was already full of humans who laughed too loudly, trying to convince themselves they were not afraid. His father's voice echoed in his mind, calm but firm, the way only an old alpha could sound. "You will be there, Kael. You will sit. You will not lose control. This kingdom needs peace more than it needs your pride." They had argued for an hour, but in the end, the king had placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder and added quietly, "This is your last chance to prove you can lead without fear." That sentence had hurt more than any blow. The problem was that Kael was not cruel, only overflowing. Too much strength, too much instinct, too much emotion he had never been taught to name. His power rolled under his skin like a restless sea. It sharpened his senses so much that a crowded room felt like being trapped under a waterfall. Every clink of glass cut him. Every spike of fear from humans near him burned his lungs. When they stared at him with secret horror, his wolf lifted its head inside his chest and whispered, "Show them why they're right to fear you." He pressed his thumbs against his temples and forced himself to inhale. Somewhere below, a string quartet began a slow, gentle song. He clung to the melody like a thin rope. "I will not ruin this," he muttered to himself. "Not tonight." He straightened his black suit, rolled his shoulders back, and walked toward the banquet hall as if he weren't afraid of what might happen the moment he stepped inside. Downstairs, in the servants' corridor that smelled of coffee and detergent, Lena was tying the black apron around her waist for the second time that day. This was her extra shift, the one she had begged the manager for so she could pay her younger brother's school fees. Her feet already ached, and steam from the kitchen frizzed the loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun. She stared at the reflection of her own tired face in the shiny steel of the refrigerator and tried to smile anyway. "You, table 7, her manager barked, handing her a silver tray and a small printed list. "That's the royal table, the Alpha King, his son, some human ministers. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not ask questions. And you absolutely do not look the prince in the eyes, got it?" Lena blinked. "Why? Is he going to turn me into a frog or something?" A couple of the other waiters snorted under their breath, but the manager did not smile. "He doesn't need magic for that. People say if you hold his gaze, your heart starts racing so fast you think you're dying. He's unstable. Just keep your head down. They tip well enough without conversation." As the others hurried off, Lena stayed a moment longer, her fingers tightening around the tray. She had heard stories, of course. Everyone had. the prince who punched pillars until the marble cracked, the royal training yard destroyed in a single uncontrolled shift, the advisor who quit and moved to the coast, saying, "I'd rather face the sea than that boy's temper." But beneath all the fear, there were other whispers, softer ones. The palace laundry women said he always picked up anything they dropped, even when they were too scared to ask. A stable boy swore he had once seen the prince sitting in the straw, cradling an injured hawk in his massive hands, his face so heartbreakingly gentle that the boy had forgotten to be afraid. And an older guard who sometimes came to the cafe where Lena worked on her usual days had told her, "The prince is not a monster. He's just a boy who was born holding a storm, and nobody ever taught him how to set it down." So as Lena stepped into the glittering hall with her tray of glasses and fragrant dishes, she felt less fear than curiosity. The room dazzled her at first, candles flickering like captured stars, women in shimmering dresses, men in formal jackets and medals that caught the light. Soft music wound between conversations in several languages. Somewhere at the center, she knew, sat the one person everyone tried not to look at. She found him easily. Kael was impossible to miss even when he sat perfectly still. He wore a black suit that seemed to swallow the light around him, the line of his shoulders too broad for the carved golden chair. His hair, dark and slightly damp from the night air, fell to his neck in loose waves. His jaw was shadowed with a short beard that made him look older than he was. But it was his eyes that pulled the breath from Lena's lungs, storm gray now, not glowing, but so sharp and tired at the same time that for a second she forgot the tray in her hands. Around him, the air felt heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The humans at his table laughed loudly, but there was a thin edge of nervousness in their voices. The Alpha King sat at the head, calm and regal, his own presence like an anchor. Kael sat at his right, fingers pressed so hard into the tablecloth that his knuckles turned white. Lena lowered her gaze, remembering the manager's warning, but not before she noticed something that did not match the stories. There was pain in those eyes, not anger, not cruelty. Just a quiet, exhausted hurt, like someone who had been told every day of his life that his hands were made only for breaking things. She moved between tables with steady steps, placing plates and refilling glasses. Her ears picked up bits of conversation, trade deals, jokes about royal customs, nervous comments about werewolf strength delivered in the tone of people who thought prejudice was charming. Lena swallowed her irritation. She needed this job, not a lecture about respect and peace. At table 7, she carefully set down a dish in front of one of the human ministers, a pink-faced man with too much perfume and too little patience. He flicked his eyes at her, clearly not seeing a person, only a server. "Faster!" he snapped without looking up from his phone. "We're hungry, girl." Lena bit down the reply that rose to her tongue. Kindness first, she reminded herself. It was something her mother had always said. In a cruel world, kindness is a quiet rebellion. She finished placing the plates and turned to refill Kael's water glass, moving with the careful grace of someone who had carried trays all her life. She felt his presence before she drew near, like heat from a fire or the pressure before a storm. Her chest tightened, and her instincts screamed at her to step back. Instead, she took one more step forward and gently tilted the bottle over his glass. It was then that things began to go wrong. One of the human ministers, emboldened by wine, leaned back in his chair and laughed too loudly. "You know, Your Majesty," he said to the king, "we appreciate your animal assistance in guarding our borders. Very helpful indeed. But between us, some of our people still feel uncomfortable around your kind." He nudged his friend with an elbow, smirking. "Especially the young prince. He looks like he might tear someone's throat out if the dessert is late." The people around him laughed uneasily. Some looked at their plates, others stared at Kael as if waiting to see if the monster would perform. Lena, still pouring water, saw Kael's jaw clamp tight. Under the table, his hands stopped pretending to be calm and curled into fists. The air around him thickened, pushing against her skin like invisible wind. She heard the fabric of his gloves strain. For a heartbeat, the candle flames on the table flickered sideways as if they might go out. His father cleared his throat. "My son has trained since childhood how to defend this kingdom, Minister Arlo," the king said, his tone polite but cold. "He is not a weapon to be joked about." "Oh, of course," the minister said quickly, raising his hands. "Just humor, no offense meant." But the damage was already done. Kael's pupils tightened to narrow points. The music from the other side of the hall seemed to fade beneath a low, growing roar that lived only in his ears. His wolf surged upward, furious and humiliated. "Show them," it snarled. "Show them how fragile they are." His palms tingled, his teeth ached as if they wanted to lengthen. Every instinct screamed at him to stand, to flip the table, to shatter the ceiling with a single howl. Not again, he thought, panic slicing through the anger. Not in front of everyone, not with my father watching. His breathing grew harsher, and people near him shifted in their chairs. Some rubbed at their arms as if suddenly cold. The guard at the far wall straightened, eyes locking on the prince, sensing the rising storm. Lena's hand shook. A trickle of water slipped past the rim of Kael's glass and spilled over his fingers, cold and clear. The tiny accident snapped her attention fully to him. She saw the tightness in his shoulders, the way his throat worked as if he were swallowing a scream, the faint tremor at the edge of his jaw. Without fully deciding to, she did the one thing no one had taught her not to do. She looked up and met his eyes. For a second, the world narrowed to gray irises rimmed with gold, bright and wild and desperately hurt. The stories were right about one thing. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to get out. But it was not because of terror. It was because, in that single locked glance, she felt all the things he could not say. The loneliness of being studied like a weapon, the exhaustion of holding back every moment of every day, the terror of his own strength. Lena's breath left her chest in a soft, shaky sound. She forgot to be a waitress. She forgot to be afraid. All she saw was a young man drowning in a storm no one had taught him to swim. "Hey," she whispered, so quietly that only he could hear. "You're okay. You don't have to prove anything to them." Something in his eyes flickered, as if her words had reached a place no one had ever touched before. But just as quickly, the wolf shoved back, furious at any attempt to soothe it. His chair scraped the floor as he thrust himself to his feet, the sound sharp as a blade. Conversations around the hall cut off mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the royal table. Kael's glass shattered in his hand, water and fragments flashing in the candlelight. The glow in his eyes flared, bright gold now, inhuman. Power rolled out from him like a wave, cutlery rattled, the nearest candles went out. A child at a distant table whimpered. Someone whispered a prayer. Lena did not think. Her body moved faster than her fear. She set the tray down on the table, reached forward, and wrapped her smaller hand around his bleeding fist before the guards could jump between them. Warm water and cold glass pressed against her skin. She felt the raw, violent strength behind the tension of his muscles, and something else, something trembling. "Kael," she said, using his name without a title, her voice low but steady. "Look at me." Around them, the hall froze. The Alpha King half rose from his seat, eyes widening. Guards tensed, waiting for the prince to explode, to push the human girl aside, to lose whatever fragile control he had left. Kael's head turned slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. His blazing eyes locked onto Lena's face, onto the stubborn kindness there, onto the hand that dared to hold his. For the first time in his life, at the very edge of madness, someone did not flinch away. Something inside his chest lurched, confused. The storm hesitated. And as the entire palace watched in breathless silence, Kael felt a strange, impossible calm begin to creep through the cracks of his rage, coming from the warm, steady hand of a waitress who should have been too afraid to touch him at all. The calm felt foreign inside Kael's chest, like cool water poured onto burning coals. For a heartbeat, he didn't trust it. Rage had always come fast and familiar. This strange quiet felt like a trick. Yet it spread slowly from the point where Lena's hand wrapped around his shattered glass and blood, winding through his muscles, softening the iron tension in his shoulders. The roaring in his ears faded enough for him to hear the tiny sounds of the hall again, the distant clink of a fork, a chair leg scraping, someone's unsteady breath. No one at the table moved. Every eye watched him as if he were a blade balanced on its tip. Only the girl holding his hand seemed unaware that she was supposed to be terrified. Her dark lashes trembled, but her grip did not. "You're bleeding," Lena murmured, voice low and steady, like a lullaby spoken instead of sung. "If you crush your hand, you won't be able to punch rude ministers later. That would be a shame, don't you think?" For the first time in hours, something almost like amusement flickered in Kael's chest. It shocked him enough that the bright gold in his eyes dimmed a little, sliding back toward storm gray. He exhaled, a rough, shaky breath that sounded far too loud in the silent hall. Behind her, a guard started forward. "Your Highness." The Alpha King lifted one hand, stopping him. His face remained carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp as knives, tracking every movement between his son and the waitress. Lena glanced at the shattered glass. Tiny shards clung to Kael's palm, glittering with water and red. Without asking permission, she reached for the folded white cloth near his plate and dabbed gently at his skin. Kael could have pulled away. He did not. The contact was strangely grounding, an anchor in the center of the storm. "Slow breaths," she muttered, so quietly only he could hear. "In, out, like the music." She tilted her head toward the quartet on the far side of the hall, which had cautiously resumed playing, their bows trembling over strings. He tried, in, out. The first two breaths scraped, but the third came easier. With each one, the invisible pressure around them loosened. Candles straightened. The suffocating heaviness in the air thinned. Somewhere a child let out a small, relieved laugh that turned quickly into a hiccup. The red-faced minister who had mocked him earlier shifted in his chair, color draining from his cheeks. It seems the prince is slightly unwell," he stammered, looking anywhere but at Kael. "No harm done, of course, just youthful energy." Kael's gaze cut to him, cold and clear now. "Be very careful what you call harm," he said softly. There was no shout in his voice, no obvious threat, yet the minister flinched as if struck. The room held its breath again, but this time the tension belonged to everyone else, not to Kael. The Alpha King rose smoothly from his chair. "The banquet is momentarily adjourned," he announced, his tone leaving no space for argument. "Please continue to enjoy the music. My staff will provide refreshments in the adjoining hall." Obediently, the guests began to rise, talking too fast, laughing too loud again, desperate to pretend the last few minutes had not felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Guards stepped closer to Kael in a loose, protective formation, but none of them touched him. They all remembered cracked marble and splintered wood. Lena finally released his hand. Her palm stung from the glass, and a thin line of his blood streaked across her wrist, warm and bright. She became aware of her manager's horrified stare from the corner of the room. Her heart sank. There would be consequences for this, no doubt. But when she looked back at Kael, whatever fear she expected to feel did not come. "Sorry about the mess," she said quietly, nodding toward the broken glass. "Water on the house." Something softened in his face, just for an instant. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'll be fine," she replied. "I've carried hotter soup." A faint ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, then vanished as two palace healers approached. One, a middle-aged woman with silver hair braided back from her face, bowed to the king, then to Kael. "Your Highness, if you'll come with us," she said gently. "We should tend that hand." Kael glanced once more at Lena. as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. The storm inside him had retreated to a low mutter, confused and watchful. "Wait," the Alpha King said, his deep voice cutting through the last traces of chaos. "The girl, what is your name?" Lena's spine snapped straight. Every eye near them swung toward her. "Lena, your majesty," she managed, trying not to sound like she might faint. The king studied her for a long moment. There was power in his gaze, but also an unexpected warmth, like a fire that could burn or comfort depending on how close you stood. "You showed courage," he said at last, "and unusual effect." He shifted his eyes to the healers. "See to any injuries she may have as well." Her manager blanched. "Your Majesty, she's just a citizen of my kingdom," the king replied calmly. "I look after all of them." The protest died on the manager's lips. Lena's cheeks flushed. "Thank you, sire, but it's only a scratch," she said. "I can wash it in the kitchen." Kael's voice surprised them both. "Let them help you," he said, more command than request, though there was no harshness in it. "You bled for me. It's the least I can do." The hall buzzed with whispers as the prince and the waitress were led away side by side, trailed by guards and healers. Some guests watched with open fascination, others turned away, unsettled by how casually a human girl had touched the kingdom's most dangerous heir and lived. In a small antechamber lined with shelves of herbs and glass bottles, the air smelled of lavender and alcohol. The healers worked quickly, pulling glass from Kael's palm, murmuring small spells to knit skin and soothe nerves. Lena sat on a nearby bench, her own cut already cleaned and bandaged, watching from what she hoped was a respectful distance. "You could have been hurt," Kael said suddenly, without looking at her. "I was hurt," she pointed out, lifting her wrapped hand. "Look at this, tiny tragedy." He huffed out something that almost counted as a laugh. The healer glanced between them, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. "You shouldn't have touched me," Kael continued more seriously. "The guards, they could have reacted. I could have reacted." "Maybe," Lena admitted. "But you were already hurting people, including yourself. Somebody had to do something." He turned to face her then, his eyes no longer glowing, just deeply, startlingly human. "You weren't afraid." Lena thought about that. "I was," she said honestly. "But fear isn't always a stop sign. Sometimes it just means you're near something important." The words landed heavier than she expected. Kael's expression shifted, a small shudder opening behind his eyes. He had spent his life watching people flinch from him, guard themselves, hide their fear behind masks. No one had ever admitted it so simply, or stepped closer anyway. Before he could respond, the Alpha King stepped into the room. The healers bowed and withdrew discreetly, leaving father, son, and waitress alone. For a moment, silence weighed between them. The king's gaze moved from Kael's bandaged hand to Lena's, then back to his son's face. Tired pride and deeper worry sat side by side in his eyes. "You held yourself back," the king said quietly. "You stopped." Kael swallowed. "I almost didn't." "But you did," the king insisted. "For the first time, you stood on the edge and chose to step back." He looked at Lena. "Because of her." Lena lifted her shoulders slightly. "I just talked," she said. "Anyone could have." "No," Kael said before his father could. "They couldn't." The Alpha King studied her with a measuring look, as if weighing invisible scales only he could see. "There is an old saying in our line," he murmured, "that the storm in the heir's heart can only be stilled by a voice that does not tremble." His mouth curved in a humorless smile. "I always assumed it meant one of my generals, or an elder, not a waitress with blistered hands." Lena blinked. "I didn't mean to still anything. I just didn't want him to break." The king nodded slowly, decision hardening in his eyes. "Sometimes the ones who do not mean to change the world are exactly the ones who do," he said. "Lena, was it?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "I will not keep you from your duties tonight," he said, "but this is not finished." He turned to his son. "Kael, return to your chambers. We will speak at dawn." Something about his tone made Kael straighten. This was not the usual lecture voice, the one packed with disappointment and anger. This one carried something else, possibility or danger, he could not yet tell. The king's gaze returned to Lena, gentle but firm. "And you, child," he said, "be ready, you will be summoned." Lena's pulse stumbled. Summoned by the king was not a sentence that usually ended with a pay raise. She opened her mouth, unsure whether she wanted to protest or agree, but no sound came. The Alpha King turned and left before she could gather words, his cloak whispering against the floor. Kael paused at the doorway, looking back at her. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he said softly, "but I'm glad you did." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone in the small room with the fading scent of herbs and a heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other thought, except one. Tomorrow, everything might change. Sleep refused to visit Lena that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the tiny room she shared with her younger brother above the noisy street, staring at the cracked ceiling while moonlight painted pale lines across the walls. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kael's gold-shot gaze and felt again the wild energy that had rolled off him like heat, and then the impossible way it had quieted under her hand. Beside her, her 12-year-old brother Milo turned over with a soft groan. "You're doing it again," he mumbled. "Doing what?" she whispered. "Thinking so loud I can hear it," he said, half asleep. "Did someone yell at you at work?" Lena considered lying, then sighed. "Sort of, and also the king might summon me tomorrow." That woke him up. He sat up so fast his messy hair stuck out in every direction. "The king, our king, big crown, serious beard, scary eyes." "His beard is actually very neat," Lena said. "And his eyes are only scary if you're lying to him, I think." "And why would he summon you?" Milo demanded. "Did you break something? Did you spill soup on a duke? Please tell me you spilled soup on a duke." She hesitated. How did you explain to a boy who collected comic books that you might have accidentally calmed the most feared prince in the kingdom with nothing but your voice and a risky amount of eye contact? "I helped the prince," she said slowly. "He lost his temper a little." Milo's mouth fell open. "You helped the Alpha Prince." Then, with awe, "Are you in trouble or are you a hero? Because I need to know whether to brag about you at school or pretend I'm an only child." Lena laughed despite the knot in her chest. "Maybe neither, maybe both. We'll find out tomorrow." She didn't add the heaviest part of her worry out loud. If the king decided she was a problem instead of a solution, she could lose her job. Without it, Milo's school fees, their rent, the medicine their mother still needed from time to time, all of it teetered on the edge. Morning came too quickly. The city woke in layers, the rumble of carts, the shout of vendors, the clatter of dishes from the cafe below. Lena dressed in her cleanest white shirt and plain black skirt, tying her hair back with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. She kissed Milo's forehead, promised to send a message as soon as she knew anything, and stepped out into the bright, too honest light of day. 2 royal guards waited outside the cafe, standing so straight they looked carved from stone. People on the street slowed to stare. Someone dropped a basket of oranges that rolled across the cobblestones. The guards bowed slightly. "Lena of Bridge Street," the taller one asked. "That's me," she said, hoping her voice sounded braver than she felt. "You are requested at the palace by His Majesty, the Alpha King," he said. "We are to escort you." Requested, not ordered. The word soothed her a little, only a little. The ride to the palace passed in a blur of stone archways and market stalls. When the gates opened, she craned her neck to stare at the high towers and wide courtyards she had only ever seen from a distance. Sunlight flashed off windows. Flags bearing the royal crest snapped in the wind. The air smelled of pine from the surrounding forests and something wilder underneath, the faint, clean scent of wolves who had changed shape and run at dawn. Inside, the palace was even more overwhelming. Polished floors reflected the pale light, paintings of former kings and queens watched from the walls. Servants moved quickly, their footsteps soft, their eyes dropping respectfully as the guards led Lena through. They stopped before two huge doors carved with scenes of wolves and stars. One guard opened them, the other gestured her forward. Lena swallowed hard. The throne room was long and bright, lined with tall windows. At its far end, on a raised dais, sat the Alpha King in a high-backed seat carved from dark wood. He did not wear a crown, he did not need one. Authority sat on his shoulders like a living thing. Beside the throne, slightly lower and to the right, stood Kael. He wore simple black trousers and a dark shirt instead of formal armor or a suit. His injured hand rested at his side, the bandage barely visible. His posture was loose but alert, like a predator at rest that could leap in an instant. When Lena entered, his eyes found her immediately. To her surprise, the storm in them was quiet this morning. "Lena," the king said, his voice echoing gently in the high space. "Come closer." She walked down the long strip of red carpet toward him, acutely aware of how small her worn shoes looked against it. Her palms sweated. Her heart drummed in her ears. She stopped at the base of the dais and bowed as best she remembered from movies and occasional parades. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," she said. The king regarded her thoughtfully. "I trust you slept," he asked. "Eventually, sire," she admitted. A flicker of humor touched his mouth. "Honesty, good." He leaned forward slightly. "You were brave last night, Lena, perhaps foolish as well. My son is not easy to approach in such a state." She glanced at Kael, then back at the king. "With respect, sir, he looked more hurt than dangerous." Kael's eyebrows shot up. No one talked about him that way, at least not in front of him. "Hurt," the Alpha King repeated, tasting the word. "Most people would have said furious or unstable. Why did you see hurt?" Lena thought about the question. "Because I've seen people lash out when they're cornered," she said slowly. "Kids at the cafe when someone makes fun of them. My brother when people say things about our mother. Anger is loud. But underneath it, there's usually something softer that nobody listened to in time." The throne room had gone very quiet. Even the distant sounds of the palace seemed to fade. Kael watched her with a strange intensity, as if he were hearing his own life explained in a language he hadn't realized he spoke. The king nodded once. "You have sharp eyes," he said, "and kind ones, a dangerous combination." She shifted, unsure whether that was a compliment. "I must ask you plainly," he continued. "Did you use any form of magic or charm on my son last night? Any potion, spell, or training?" "No, Your Majesty," Lena said at once. "I don't know any magic. I barely know how to boil tea without burning it." Kael's lips twitched. The king hid a smile behind his hand. "So," the king said, settling back, "you spoke, you touched him, that is all." "That's all," she confirmed. "Sometimes people just need someone to remind them they're not alone inside their head." The words hit Kael like a soft blow, not alone inside his head. He had spent years believing the storm was his, and his alone, that no one could understand it, much less stand inside it with him. Yet this small human girl spoke as if she had walked those winds herself. The king exchanged a look with his son. Something unspoken passed between them, an old worry meeting new hope. "Lena of Bridge Street," the Alpha King said finally, "I have a proposal that will change your life." Her stomach dropped. "If it involves prison, Your Majesty, I humbly decline," she blurted, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "I mean, sorry, that was a joke. A bad one, I'm very nervous." To her surprise, Kael actually laughed, a real, short laugh that softened his whole face. The king chuckled low in his chest. Not prison, he assured her. A position. For years, my council has searched for ways to help Kael master his power without crushing his spirit. We have tried discipline, isolation, brutal training. None of it has helped as we hoped. His gaze sharpened. Last night, in less than a minute, you did what my elders, my generals, and I have failed to do for years. You reached him. Lena opened her mouth, then closed it again, startled. I cannot ignore that, the king went on. So I ask this, will you come to the palace as an attendant to the crown prince? You will be paid 10 times your current wages. Your family will be provided for. Your job will be simple and impossible. Be present. Speak with him. Walk with him when the storm rises. Help him remember he is more than his rage. The words hung between them like a spell. Lena's mind whirled. 10 times her wages. Milo's schooling guaranteed. Their mother's medicine constant. They could move from the cramped room above the cafe to a real apartment with windows that closed properly. It sounded like a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. To live in the palace, next to the prince everyone feared, to stand near that power every day and hope it never slipped. I'm just a waitress, she said faintly. Surely there are wiser people, braver people. Wiser, perhaps, the king said. Braver, that I doubt. His eyes softened. Courage is not the absence of fear, child. It is choosing to act while your hands shake. You have already proven you can do that. Kael stepped forward, descending one step from the dais so he was closer to her height. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, but there was no threat in the way he moved now, only a kind of careful gravity, like someone approaching a wild animal for fear of startling it. You don't have to say yes, he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. If you walk away, I won't be angry. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. Lena looked up at him. Beneath the broad shoulders and sharp jaw, she saw the same thing she had seen last night. A young man terrified of himself, trying desperately not to be what everyone thought he was. The storm was still there, but this morning she also saw something new, hope, fragile and blinding as sunrise. In my neighborhood, she murmured, half to herself, we say if life hands you a dragon, you might as well learn to ride it. Kael's eyebrows lifted. Are you calling me a dragon or life? Both, she said, and despite everything, a small, incredulous smile tugged at her lips. Behind them, the Alpha King watched, the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders, and yet in his eyes there burned a small, bright flame of fatherly relief. For the first time since Kael's birth, the future felt a fraction less heavy. Lena's heart pounded. Fear whispered of danger, of gossip, of making some fatal mistake in front of nobles. Another voice, quieter but steadier, spoke of Milo's grin, her mother's tired eyes, the way Kael had looked when he almost lost control, and the way he had looked when he didn't. She took a breath that felt like the start of a run she couldn't see the end of. Your Majesty, she said, lifting her chin, if you truly believe I can help, then yes, I accept. The king exhaled slowly, as if releasing a held breath that had lasted years. Then so it shall be, he declared. For a moment, warmth flashed across Kael's features. Gratitude, relief, something deeper he didn't dare name. But beneath it all, in a corner of his mind where only the wolf could hear, another feeling stirred. Mine, the wolf whispered, curious and certain. Kael's hand tightened unconsciously at his side. He did not understand that word yet, not fully. He only knew that as Lena stood there in the sunlight of the throne room, agreeing to step into his storm, the world he thought he knew shifted quietly on its axis. And somewhere deep inside the palace, forces that had slept for generations began to wake, sensing that the impossible had just taken its first, trembling step.